Today, we're going to be talking about it's our week number 9, and we're going to be talking about accounting. I know, right? Yes, please don't fall asleep. I promise I'm going to try to make it simple. Um, I struggle with this. Accounting sometimes looks like Chinese to me. So for those of you in the admin department, well, congratulations. This is going to be very easy for you to understand. But for the rest of us that struggle with the concept of accounting or the numbers or what like a financial statement is, we're going to briefly talk about it. We're not really going to go in detail. This is not an accounting class. The purpose of this class is for you to have a general idea of how, what the numbers mean and how activities translate into numbers, how those activities affect the health of the business. You want to be able to look at a financial statement and understand what that means and how what you do as a leader affects all of that. So everything we do here, like whether, it is from our KPIs, the amount of people we hire, all of that has a financial impact in the company and in our profit and in the money that we can actually spend. And so it's important to have financial literacy. And that's why we're going to go over this concept. Again, it's going to be very simple. We're not going to go into anything complex. It's just for you to have a general idea. As leaders, you need to understand this because when you are running a business or you're running a team or a department, every single decision you make will impact the business financially somehow, either positive or negative. And you need to understand what that is and how it does it. So we're going to be talking about the power of financial analysis, scoreboards, and financial optics. Okay. So the power of financial analysis. Why do we need to analyze all the numbers and the financials? Because we want to be able to anticipate. We want to be able to look at the trends, to look at the patterns, and to anticipate, looking at the numbers. We also want to make informed decisions. So you don't want to be making decisions crazy when, like, if you want to hire more people or invest money in advertisement or whatever you want to do, you have to look at the numbers to see if this is something that you should be doing. So it's very helpful when you're making decisions in your business. And something very important is the language of a business is accounting. So again, a lot of people don't pay a lot of attention to accounting. If numbers are not your thing, like me, it's a little boring. It can be a little boring, a little bit like, like a uncharted territory that we don't even want to look at. Everybody just want to do their part. So let's say if I am the production manager, all I care is about production. That's it. Have somebody else take care of the numbers. That's not my forte. Or wrong. You need to understand the numbers because, like I said before, every decision you make impact the numbers. And the business has a language, right? That language is accounting. If you cannot speak the language, if you cannot even understand the language, how can you play the game? It's impossible. So it is very important whether, you are a team lead, a manager, whether you have a side business, whether you want to own a business in the future. But any person in a leadership position needs to understand this language. So business, it's also a game, right? And like I said, it has a language that we all need to speak, and it has a scoreboard. And that scoreboard is going to help us with the optics and with the strategy. So what are the critical values that need to be executed to provide the results I want? So number one, financial optics. You have to look at trends and relationships. And number two, income statements. You need to have multiple time periods side by side. So you have to be able to look at your data in multiple, from multiple time periods, and you need to be able to analyze it. Today, we're going to be talking specifically about three dials or scoreboards There are many scoreboards, but we're going to focus on three. These three are the main scoreboards, are the primary statements that everybody should look at, and the ones that you should know what they are, and you should know, how they look like. So whenever you see it, you're not going to be lost. Again, we're not going into details. This is just general concepts. So the first scoreboard that we're going to look at is a balance sheet, right? And the balance sheet is basically, right? Accountants have a lot of fancy terms because I guess they, want to, maybe make their work look harder than what it is. It's really hard. Their job is really hard, but they use a lot of fancy terminology. A balance sheet, it's basically things and stuff that you have or the business has, and you have that on the left, and then on the right you have things you owe and things you own. So under things and stuff, you have things like cash, accounts receivable, inventory, and paid expenses. Those are things and stuff. They are also called assets. But again, assets are just things and stuff. And then you have on the right the things you owe, like accounts payable. Those are the bills that you need to pay, taxes, because obviously we need to pay taxes, and notes that are, like loans. Like if you finance something and you have a loan that you have to pay, that will be the notes. And that's the liability, right? And then the stuff you own, under that, you're going to have investments and earnings. And that's what they call equity. So again, things and stuff, things you owe, things you own as a business, right? Now, the left side, the things and stuff, need to equal the sum of the right side, which is the things you owe and the things you own. So the assets need to equal the sum of your liabilities and your equity. Again, when you use these words, liability, equity, assets, ooh, fancy, what's happening? It's very simple. Just things and stuff, things you owe, and things you own, right? So just an easy example. If you have $100 in things and stuff or assets, right? Then that needs to equal whatever you owe plus whatever you own. So in this case, you owe $40, you own $60, and the sum of 40 plus 60 is 100. So 100 equals 100. That's why it's called a balance sheet, because the two sides need to balance each other out. So you always, if it doesn't balance out, there's something wrong, right? Your numbers are wrong. So every balance sheet the name says it itself. It needs to balance itself. So things and stuff equals things you owe plus things you own. I hope that's simple enough so far. All right, so this is an example of what a balance sheet looks like. Just a lot of line items, but it's basically, again, assets on the left and then liabilities and equity on the right. And you see how the total number at the bottom, they equal each other. The number on the left equals the number on the right. Okay, so that's what it looks like. That's basically what a balance sheet looks like. So whenever somebody hands you a balance sheet moving forward, you're not going to be totally lost, right? Now you have a little bit of an idea. All right, so a balance sheet is a snapshot, right? So it's like taking a picture in a particular moment in time. So for example, let's say today is the 3rd of January. If I get a balance sheet from the admin department, it's going to say as of January 3rd, 2024. And it's like a snapshot into that specific time. Like I'm looking at this balance sheet as of today. Now, if you're going to take something from this class, this is what you take. Okay, forget about anything else. If it's too complicated for you, it's fine. This is what you need to understand. You can only spend cash. You cannot spend your earnings or your profit. Profit is another word for earnings, right? So a lot of businesses get in trouble because they look at their profits. Either they look at the revenue or they look at their profits. So they're looking at the wrong dials. They're looking at the wrong things, at the wrong measurements, right? Imagine you go to the doctor and you want to do your annual, and your doctor says, okay, let's do all the labs. And you do the labs and they come up with, a big report that has a bunch of numbers, right? A bunch of numbers, and it tells you that your cholesterol is 200 and that your blood pressure is 240 over 80. And it tells you that your blood sugar is 400, right? And it tells you a bunch of stuff. And the doctor is reading that aloud to you. And the doctor says, well, I don't know what any of this means, but you look fine to me. What would you do? I mean, I would find another doctor. I don't know about you. You want a doctor that can look at your results and can give you a proper diagnosis, right? So that's why we look at these numbers. That's why we look at all these statements, because this is how we diagnose the health of a business. That's how we know if we're going out of business, if we're staying in business, if we're doing great, if we're doing bad, if we need to change something. That's how we diagnose it. We need to understand what the numbers mean, just like a doctor needs to understand what a lab report means. When your results are ready for you to get a proper diagnosis, right? But it's very important to look at the right things. If you're only looking at profit, you're looking at the wrong thing. Now, profit is very important. It tells you a lot about your business, but you cannot spend your profit. And we're going to go into that into later. But again, I speak to, people that have small businesses all the time, and all they look at is revenue and profit. Guess what? You cannot spend your revenue, you cannot spend your profit. So you're looking at the wrong thing. You might be going out of business and you don't even know it. Now, the second scoreboard we're going to be look at looks something like this, and it's called an income statement. And an income statement is basically your sales or revenue. It's the same thing, sales, revenue is the same thing. So your revenue minus your expenses. So your operating expenses. And that will give you your profit or your earnings or your net income. Again, different terms that they all mean the same thing. Profits and earnings are the same thing. Net income is the same thing, right? So when we're talking about earnings, profit, net income, same thing. So your revenue minus your expenses equals your profit. So again, you cannot just be looking at revenue. So let's say the revenue in our case, we're a law firm and we have cases, right? We do car accident cases. When you settle a case, right, we are entitled to a fee. That fee is our revenue. So let's say you settle a case for $100,000. Our fee is 33.3%. So it's $33,333. Now, that's not the money that we have for spending, right? That is a revenue. Now you have to deduct the expenses of running this business. So all of a sudden, you don't have $33,000 anymore. You have a lot less, right? But guess what? You cannot even spend that. That amount doesn't necessarily mean that you have the cash to spend. So we have a reductions department, right? The reduction department, the money is sitting in our trust account. So in theory, right, you have your revenue minus your expenses in your trust account sitting there. So in theory, you have a profit, yet you cannot spend that profit. Everybody knows you cannot touch the money in the trust account, right? You technically have it, it's there. However, you cannot spend it because you cannot spend profit. You can only spend cash. It's only when the reduction specialist finalizes the case, they give, they do the reductions, the check is here, it's in the trust account, the client signs all the paperwork, the client gets their check, and now we can deposit our part in our operating account. Now we have cash. Now we can spend the money. You see the difference? So it's very important because, again, profit is very important. You want to know what your profit is. But at the end of the day, profit only tells you a part of the story. And it is, again, a theory. It's not tangible, it's a theory. This is how an income statement looks like. So, for example, in this case, this is a made-up company. You start with $1 million in revenue, and then you have to subtract the cost of goods sold and then you have your gross profit, but then you have to subtract your operating accounts, and then you have to subtract your taxes, and then you have your net income, which is your profit, right? If you're only looking at revenue, you're in big trouble. If you're only looking at the $1 million in revenue, it looks like you're making a lot of money, but that's not the number to look at. If you're looking at your operating income, it looks like you're doing decent, but that's not the number you need to look at. Now, when you look at your profit, now this tells you a better story about the financials of your business, you know. But at the end of the day, it's still a theory. It's only telling you if your revenue exceeds your expenses, and if so, by how much. That's all this number is telling you. But again, you cannot spend this number. So let's take a look at like a very simple example. Is there a difference between these two businesses? So they are the income statements for two different businesses. So business number one, they make $10 in revenue and they have $6 in expenses, right? So their profit is $4. So 10 in revenue, 6 in expenses, profit is $4. Now you have company number two, they make $1,000 in revenue. Their expenses is $996 and they're making $4 of profit. Two companies making the same profit, same amount of profit. If you're only looking at the profit, what it tells you is, well, it's the same profit. You could fall into the trap of, well, it's kind of the same, but it's not. You see, you have to be able to look at everything. You look at the right dials to diagnose your business. Because when I look at company number two, that company's in big trouble, right? The revenue is, they have a higher revenue than company number one, but their expenses are through the roof. So their profits shrink. That company should not be making the same profit as the other company. But again, if you're only looking at profit, if you're just comparing the two companies just solely based on the profit, it looks like they're around the same. But when you look at the whole thing, when you look at the entire income statement, you can see a deeper story. You can go into details. You can actually see where company number two is, going to run into very serious issues very, very soon. So that's why it's important to understand as leaders things like headcount, for example. Payroll is one of our biggest expenses, right? Whenever there is an issue in the department, it is very common. It is a rookie manager mistake. I've made it. Most of us have made it, where we say, we have this issue. What do we need? We need more people. We're short-staffed. That's usually the answer. We're short-staffed. That's why we're not getting productivity. That's why we're not moving the cases. It's too much work. We need more people. That is not always the case. Actually, most of the time, that is not the case. You don't need more people. You need maybe better training. You need your staff to have better time management, to be more efficient. You know what I mean? But not necessarily you need more people added to the team. Let's say you have an employee, a case manager, that is not meeting their KPIs. Again, KPIs are there for a reason, right? Why? Because it impacts all these scorecards. But we get to that in a moment. You have a case manager that they're not meeting their KPIs. They are working at 60% capacity. So they're not a superstar, but they're doing just enough not to get fired, right? They're doing 60%, not 100, but 60% that gets them by. All of a sudden, you have a productivity issue, right? Because that person is obviously not doing everything they're supposed to do. And now you're like, oh, but they perform, they're committed, they come every day, they're here every day. I can count on them. We're just short staff. Let me hire another person to do that job, to help with the production. So now you have two people doing the job that one person is supposed to do. Now you are doubling your head count, right? And that is shrinking your profit because your revenue stays the same because you have two people doing what one person is doing. So your productivity is not going up. You're producing exactly the same with double the amount of people. Therefore, your expenses are going through the roof and your profit is shrinking. And that eventually is going to give us less money that we can use and we can spend. You see the correlation? You see how it is so important to stay on top of the KPIs. I know that, for some people it's like annoying, it could be trivial, but there's a purpose to everything. Every single number, every single measurement we have affects these numbers, affects our revenue, affect our profit, our expenses, all of it. So it is extremely important as leaders when you're making this kind of decision. That's why I told you it's important to understand the language of the business, the accounting side, because when you're making all these decisions, you need to understand how that's affecting the company. Like when you order supplies, for example, I know it sounds trivial, right? Supplies, how much can that cost? Okay, but if you order supplies you don't really need, those are expenses. It adds up. It shrinks our profit. Everything affects everything. So you have to be very careful with the decisions you make as a leader. Now, like I said before, an income statement is a theory. It is designed to tell you if revenue exceeds expenses and if so, by how much. And once again, super important, you cannot spend your profit. Now, we have the third statement is a cash flow statement, and it looks something like this. You have three kinds of cash. You have operating cash, investing cash, and financing cash. You can either earn or spend your cash, right? You can either earn or spend your operating cash, earn or spend your investing cash, earn or spend your financing cash. So let's say you start with $50. So you have $50 in cash and you spend $10 in operating cash. You make $50 in investing cash and you make another $10 in financing cash. And all of a sudden you end up with 100. So if you get handed a cash flow statement that tells you that you end up with $100, looking at the entire cash flow statement, it gives you the story of how you ended there. Again, that is why it's important to understand, what it is, what it means, and the story. At the end of the day, the whole point of accounting is what accountants do, right? Is they take activities and they translate them into numbers. That's what they do. Activities, and they translate them into numbers. And they're able to speak that language. Unfortunately, accountants are not very good at teaching the rest of us, humble humans, that language. So that's why there's usually a disconnect. And there's a lot of confusion and mystique around this if you're not proficient in accounting. But it's, again, you understand how it looks like, you understand what it is, you're able to look at a financial statement and you can see the story. If you're able to see the story, then you have an understanding, you can diagnose the health of your business. And an example of what a cash flow statement looks like is something like this. So you see how it has a lot of line items, but at the end of the day, all you need to look at is you have your operating cash, your investing cash, and your financing cash. And at the end, you have the cash flow that you have right now, how much you started the year with, and your total cash flow for the year. So that already, it gives you an idea. It gives you a snapshot of what's happening in terms of cash flow. It's very easy to see. And now, based on these numbers, if you're able to understand them, you're able to make business decisions around this. So we talked about the three scorecards, right? The three main scorecards that you all need to know: the balance sheet, the income statement, and the cash flow statement, right? If you look in the balance sheet, under things and stuff, you have cash. That is the same cash that you see in your cash flow statement. It is the same. And if you look at the balance sheet on the things you own, you look at your earnings or your profits, and those earnings are the same earnings that you're going to see in your income statement. So having these three scorecards are extremely important to, once again, understand the business diagnose the business, and it would help you to make informed decisions financially. And again, as leaders, super important that we understand this. So in general, I want you to look at the balance sheet as if it was a world atlas. And then the income statement and the cash flow, it's more like a street map. So for example, the balance sheet will be something like, let's say you're looking at the world atlas and you say, okay, the North American continent. So you're looking at the North American continent. That is the balance sheet. The income statement and the cash flow statement, it's something like Northwest 154th Street in Miami Lakes. So balance sheet is more, it's broad. It has a lot more information. Income statement and cash flow is more details. It gives you a better story, a more precise story of how you got there. So this is what I mentioned before. Accountants take activity and convert them to numbers. That is the scorecards that we looked at. And if you want to understand the scorecard, you must be able to understand how activities get converted into numbers to begin with. And a simple analogy is a soccer game. So let's say you have Ronaldo, right? He's playing against another team. He has the ball and he's trying to score a goal. Right before he goes to score a goal, he gets tackled, and the referee says there's going to be a penalty. Ronaldo gets the ball and he scores that penalty, and the team wins 1-0. If you only looking at the result of the match, it's going to be very hard for you to puzzle the story that got you there. You only know that your team won 1-0, right? But you don't know anything else. Just by looking at the number, it's very hard to tell a story. That's why it's very important that you look at all your scoreboards, not just one, and you're not looking at just one number, you're not looking just at profit, you're not looking just at revenue, you're looking at everything, and you need to know what everything is. Now, when you look at the whole scoreboard here for the game at the end, you can see the match statistics. Now you have a better understanding of what happened in the game. Now you can see that Ronaldo's team had more possession of the ball. You can see how many corners they had, how many offside, how many fouls committed, attempts on target, total attempts. Now you start building a better idea of what happened in the match. See how looking at the right numbers give you a better understanding. But again, don't just look at one number. You have to look at the whole thing. So the whole purpose of a business is to convert things and stuff into revenue, convert revenue into profits, and convert profits into operating cash. Let me say that again. The whole purpose of a business is get our things and stuff, convert them into revenue, revenue convert into profits, and profits convert into operating cash. So I'll give you an example. Let's say if you look at the column in the middle, let's say you have a company that has around $28,000 in assets, $50,000 in revenue, and around $17,000 in profits. Now, when you look at the operating cash, look how that it's negative. Because again, you cannot spend your profit, you can only spend your cash. That company is in big trouble. Now, how does that relate to us? In our case, the kind of business that we run, our cases will be kind of the things and stuff we have, and then the revenue will be when the case gets settled, the fees that we're entitled to, that's our revenue, and then our profits are the fees minus the expenses, and then finally we would have the operating cash. So let's use hypothetical numbers. Some of these numbers are not hypothetical, but some are. So for example, last year we signed 5,537 cases. This number is for you, right? In theory, right, everybody knows, or everybody should know, that our average fee per case is $10,000, right? So if you take the average of all the cases that we settle, usually the settlement amount is around $30,000. So that means that our fee per case is around $10,000. So in theory, right, we have an inventory of cases. We have 5,537. So in theory, we should have around $55 million in fees, right? That is in theory what that number should mean. Okay. However, there's going to be cases that have liability denied, no coverage, cases where the client is going to discharge us and go to another attorney. So right there, we're leaking cases. And so all of those cases are not going to translate into revenue. There's maybe no VI, whatever. And this is why, once again, going back to as a leader, understanding how your decisions and the way you run your team makes a big difference in the numbers. So let's say in intake, for example, how are we leaking cases in intake, right? All those discharges, those are cases that are never going to make it into production, that are never going to get converted into revenue, right? So if we can minimize the amount of discharges, we can maximize our revenue, right? How do we do that? Well, maybe fighting for that liability. Instead of just discharging a case, maybe let's fight a little harder for that liability. You know, let's give better service to the clients. If the client is discharging you because they're calling you, you're not picking up the phone and they go to another attorney, that's a problem. And you might say, oh, it's just one client, it's just two clients, but there's a compounding effect. Because if every case manager gets a discharge, all of a sudden you have 16 people in intake, now you have 16 discharges in a month. That is that is a big number. That makes a big difference, right? Making sure that we are looking for the coverage, making sure that we're following all the right steps. Again, if we're able to minimize the amount of discharges we get, we're able to maximize our revenue. Also, time frame. Time frame is extremely important. Every day a case sits on your desk, we're losing money. In accounting, when inventory goes up, inventory is the cases we have, right? That's bad. Inventory up, that's bad in accounting terms. Technically, we have the assets, right? We have the cases, but they're not converted into money yet. So, having those accumulating cases, the balloon effect, that is a problem. So if we get more efficient at turning around the cases faster, our revenue can go up and our profit can go up. So yes, submitting that case, that demand today versus tomorrow makes a difference. Calling that adjuster to get VIP limits, that makes a difference. In medical management, turning around the cases, it makes a difference. Every single thing, the demand, sending out the demands on time, making sure that we shorten the time, it makes a difference. The more time the case is sitting on your desk, the more money we're losing. So you see how, it affects, it's a snowball effect. So for example, out of that 55 million in fees that we theoretically have, only a portion of that is going to get converted into revenue. So let's say we convert around 3,000 cases, around 28 million. Again, these numbers are hypothetical. Let's say we have around 28 million in fees, right? Because we settle all those cases, right? And now we have to get our revenue, which is the 28 million. And let's say it cost us 15 million to run the firm. So now you have 28 minus 15, 13 million. 13 million is theoretically, right? That's our profit, but that's only a theory because we cannot spend that 13 million. If it's sitting in the trust account, we cannot spend that money. We need to make sure that those 13 million make their way into our operating account. But let's say the reduction team, they have a backlog, they have a big balloon effect, and they're not turning around cases fast enough or efficient enough. They have too many hospitals, whatever the excuse is. So out of those 13 million in profit that I theoretically have, only 3 million make their way into our operating account, right? So all of a sudden, I don't have 13 million to spend. I only have 3 million to spend because that's one of my operating account. That's all the money I have to spend. So let's say, for example, everybody knows we bought a building, and this year we are doing the remodeling for the building, and we're doing the first floor. And the first floor is going to cost around $4 million. I know it's a lot of money, right? We cannot tell the company, the construction company, well, can I pay you with my profit? They're going to slap you. No, you're going to pay with profit. You need to pay with cash, right? You don't go to a hotel and try to check in for 5 nights and say, well, I don't have cash, but I will pay you with my profit. Here's my income statement so you can see how much profit I make. No, nobody's, no, nobody's going to do that. They're going to be like, sir, we accept cash, Visa, or MasterCard. Which one do you want? You can only spend your cash. You cannot spend your profit. So in this example, for that, let's say only 3 million made their way into our operating account, and now we have to pay the construction company $4 million for the build out. All of a sudden, we're negative $1 million, and now we're going out of business. But again, if you're looking at our revenue, you're like, oh, we're making 28 million in revenue. If you're looking at our profit, oh, we're making 13 million in profit. We're making a lot of money. And all of a sudden, we're going out of business. That's why you see sometimes millionaires filing for bankruptcy. That's not always the reason, but you see people that are supposed to look like successful businesses and they're crashing. That's because they're not paying attention to the right numbers. So it is very important for you to know how the activities that you do as an employee and as a leader correlate to these numbers. I mean, I don't want to scare anybody. This is just hypothetical, but I want to give you an example of how, you can get into trouble very quickly if you don't pay attention. So in contrast, let's assume that we have the same scenario. Let's say that we are turning the cases faster, that we are, getting less discharges, and now our revenue goes up, and instead of 28, now we have 40 million. That's our revenue. Now, the same 15 million that it cost us to operate the business, now our profit is 25. Let's say reductions, turn it around, and they are able to put in our operating account 13 million. Now we're able to pay the build out, and we're left with 9 million that we can still, use for other stuff. You see the difference? You guys see the difference? Again, very important. It is very important. Activities, they get converted into numbers, and the numbers tell you a story. So, things we need to take into consideration. Inventories, in our case, will be cases sitting unresolved. Accounts receivable are the reductions cases that are unresolved, and accounts payable is basically the bills that admin needs to pay. All right. So remember when we went through the balance sheet and under things and stuff, we had inventory and accounts receivable. This is what it is. Our things and stuff is our cases, our inventory and accounts receivable, right? That are just sitting there. So, for example, here you have it in the balance sheet. You have reduction cases unresolved, cases sitting unresolved. You have your cash and your expenses. And then in the things you owe, which are your liabilities, you have the accounts payable. And then everything else we went through. Now, the main difference between profits and operating cash are inventory, account receivable, and accounts payable. These things, when they fluctuate, they make a difference, in profit and operating cash. So when inventory is up, it's bad. When accounts receivable is up, it's bad. So whenever we have a balloon effect, that's why we track balloon effects. And most of you might say, what's the point? What do you care? We care. Balloon effect means our inventory is going up. The cases are not moving fast enough. This is really bad for profit and for cash. All right. So this is how we measure. We measure assets. We want to convert them into sales, sales into profit, and profits into operating cash flow. We need to compare trends and relationships. through multiple time periods in the same paper. That's why we use the three scorecards that we just talked about, the balance sheet, the income statement, and the cash flow statement. We need to look at the optics because we need to make informed business decisions and we need to be able to track all this information. And we use dashboards. And in these dashboards, we're going to be looking at critical drivers. And these are the cause and effect. And we're going to be looking at the frequency. That's why we have dashboards in Leadify. I hope you all use your dashboards. All these dashboards are, again, they translate into everything that we just covered. And I hope that you can see how your KPIs are so important and that why we make such a big deal about performance and meeting KPIs. Because again, everything makes a difference. Everything impacts the number. Every activity you do, whether as an employee or as a leader, makes a difference to the overall health of the business. So this is it. I tried to make it very simple. Questions? Don't look too excited. Accounting can be fun sometimes. Is there something that you were surprised by in any of these examples? Is that something that you guys kind of knew, makes sense? You're just confused? I don't know if you guys are confused or just processing the information. Okay, Gisele, tell me. You're in the middle of my screen. What is your takeaway? We cannot hear you. No, we cannot hear you. Okay, we cannot hear you. Let's go to Imari because you work in the reductions department. And I think this is, we always talk about cash flow. And everybody in reductions department always hear me talking about cash flow like a broken record. But I never actually show you guys the how or you know what I mean? So what is your takeaway from that?
For me, I mean, it makes sense. Like, of course, if the case is stay there longer, then you can't deposit anything. But of course, it, it, seeing more like I know we know the number of how the daily expenses, like how much it costs each day to run the company. Um, so it's not like, oh, if I deposit that much, great, we're running the company. It's like, okay, that, but everything, all the other expenses besides that. And then it's like, what is actually your cash? The cash part like got me like, oh, okay, that makes more sense too. Like, because you think, oh, your profit and that's it. Like, great, we're making so much money, but no, no, you have to take everything into account. And then what you're actually, making to use so you don't run out of business. But no, it made a lot of sense. I like this, the whole money aspect of it.
I hope now you understand why we push you so much to get that money into our operating account because we need cash to spend.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Okay, well, if we don't have any more questions, if nobody has anything to say, we can finish early today. So thank you guys. We're almost done. We're almost at the end. So see you guys next week. Bye.